Also in the breaks, any questions? Go to Henrik. That principle is called outsourcing. So, well, I'm happy to answer questions also in the break. The problem is, I mean, if you ask a professor, fundamentally he can't give a good answer in less than 5 minutes. That's one of the challenges. So, obviously, some of the questions, let's go through some of the stuff, make it easy. So, having had that, let's take some early things that we have discussed a little bit and summarize a little bit where we are, what you might have learned, where you might look at some of the things. Obviously, trying to make simplification out of a complex subject is not an easy task. For some people coming from the outside, you might very well conclude that's complex. Depending where you are on the journey, it's a question of complexity. Can I repeat the pattern easily? I mean, if you're in the habit of just using the method, obviously it's a little bit more complex. But on the other side, you are reinventing everything that we are actually trying to be able to say that you don't need to reinvent. So, depending, I mean, where you are in a journey and your insight, it's different views. Some of the people actually we have here who wish more detail, even kind of one. So we have various levels of understanding, various levels of this is what I think is good, this is what I think something should have. So some of the things that I believe we should have right now as an understanding. We should understand the following. We work in objects. Now you might say, that's good because we don't do that in our company. That's not true. You do work in objects. You just don't know it. What Annette showed in Lego, she took the object and said, this is at that level, the business area is at this level, it connects to this. She works in objects. She just doesn't know it. It's independent of a person knowing it or not. You have to work in objects. There is some kind of a plan within it. Even if you don't have a plan, that's a plan, because it's a lack of a plan. You just work with the objects in a more unorganized way. The factum is, these entities, these objects exist. Doesn't matter which of these objects we're talking about. You can have, if we go here, this is over here in the process. We all know at this level, there is the application. There is none of your organizations that sits here that does not handle your processes, the objects of your processes within your applications. You might not have standardized it as much. You might just have documented it. That process goes to that application. Independent, the relationships defined that how they work together, they are there. You might have just reinvented it yourself. When we go over here where we see measurements, media, channels, or data, we had lots of discussions yesterday about data. It's one of the trends in the market. We had Professor Marlon travel all the way from Europe over here. It's very kind, by the way, from him, to share with us the aspects of these trends. Organizations around the world talk about big data. This is not something that is outside. They talk about data analytics. They talk about business intelligence. So the aspects of process analytics, the aspects of process mining is not a new subject, but it's definitely a trend. Organizations realize we used to do process modeling for the process. There is more to it today. Good. So I believe one of the things we have understood that the leading practice does, they have studied these objects. They have studied these objects in detail. Some of them from semantics, the relationships, the rules, etc., etc. These have been put, this is the example in this case, about the value objects, how they relate, and which artifacts / templates exists. There is no complexity in this. You might just find it complex to put your head around that I didn't need to reinvent this. You will, in this case, if you have done it before, you would have had actually to make those templates because they didn't exist in the market. Some of it goes faster, others just takes longer. This, we say, there's no reasons not to have that already. So there are certain templates involved. Also this, we've seen a repeatable pattern, we have documented, and we have described how this can be successfully repeated. So there's those two major learnings. Objects fit together, the relationships are described. Furthermore, there is actually a science to it that each of you can repeat. This is called decomposition and composition. Is there somebody among you who has not heard this word before? Is there somebody who has heard it?
Decomposition and composition.
Must be some that didn't raise their hand. Somebody lying? Hey, you ask for honesty, maybe then it comes. Good, so everybody understands, or the most understand, that decomposing something is actually to break it down, the granularity. Now we saw the Lego case, it's always nice. Independent of how much there is there or not. Let's face it, it's all the childhood parts of the Lego. Let's keep it on the Lego. Anybody remembers there's multiple kind of Lego blocks? You know, we have the Duplo. Now I might say something wrong because it's some time ago that I had girls. They did play with some, but not as extensive as I did at that time. And, my brother's kids, they played a lot with Lego as well. So, but anyway, there's the Duplo blocks, right? Then there is what I call the normal Lego blocks. I guess there exists nothing that's called normal. What are they called? The smaller ones. The Lego systems. Good, you see. Already here, I mean, this became more advanced, and it was about when I was about 15, 16, like in '84, there came this Lego Techniques out. Or this was just when the ideas. At least that's what it's called. Is it still called today, Lego Techniques? My school. Yes, there's much more right now in the meantime. You are right. So but then Lego Techniques came out. Now they fitted to the Lego system, but they had different holes within it where you could have engineering. At that time, even when I was 16, I actually certified as a Lego construction or an engineer. They had certifications. That was many years ago. Do these guys still have it? Not okay. Back then they had certification paths you could go.
You're showing your age.
That truly shows like, yes, among the freaks there was some who would anyway, so but not all Lego parts fit to each other. So if I would have, I don't know how they call it anymore in English, these Lego plates, you know, the plates where you build up the
platform.
Yeah, the platform. What are they called officially? Is the name or just plates or platform?
Plates.
Okay, plates. Okay, it's good. So they're just the plates, you know, where you put on. Now I can put a Duplo block on it because they kind of already made that this fits. This is good. But on a Duplo plate, I could not put the small parts on it. There were certain parts that didn't work. So I could build with my bigger Duplo parts the house, but not the spaceship I was working on, or whatever. So think about it this way. This is the subject of big versus small. This is kind of granularity discussion. Big granularity, small granularity. Kind of, there came a good subject of saying, ah, yes, that small piece which I had, my ambulance things, which, I mean, in the end of the day, I've decomposed everything and composed it in a different way. And everybody does that. That I do. Maybe not today. So, this is what we are talking about here. Granularity. Because I can decompose it. Higher granularity, more detailed granularity. This is what we are talking about. Higher granularity, business areas, more detailed granularity. This is within this. This is within this. Or this relates to that. Sometimes it's not within it, it relates to it. It's not always by decomposing, it's within. It just relates. Yeah, a KPI is not within the critical success factor. It relates to it. But it is decomposed, the relationship, because the one addresses the other. And therefore it fulfills it. But not all decomposed aspects fulfill the other. Again, there's different attributes and relations to it. Now I know with the descriptions we give, it might sound, oh, it all sounds so complex. No, it's actually high granularity, low granularity. You might then say, yeah, but it's going to be difficult. I won't be able to understand the entire meta model. You won't. There might be one or two people within this room, with you guys maybe a little bit more. And I already know with Lloyd up here, where we already had the discussions. He already had which of this can be automated within UML and this and descriptions and like in BPMS structures. There is few of you who both have the mindset and the wanting willingness to say what's the next steps of it. Those, we are willing to have those discussions, obviously. This is what our community does. For those of you others, do I need to know all these meta relations? Can anybody say that? Do I need to know them? I mean, you've been here a couple of days, so you should have enough. Some of you already are along in the communities. Actually, even in the trainings. Some of those people who are in these trainings already have 3 or 4 trainings of lead. Are already lead certified people, either in process area or business architecture area. But nonetheless, do I need to know all the object relations? Do I need to know the meta model? Can somebody say? We have somebody saying yes. We have somebody shaking their head no. So, James, you shook the head no. Why not? I mean, you have been one of those. You have participated in how many trainings?
3.
Yes, 3 various trainings. Holland, Denmark, and in Africa. So, he's one of the followers. I would say, if he didn't get it at that time, it would be difficult. But why don't I need to know all the object relations? It's built into the templates. And it's furthermore, that's one thing. So that's in the way of working and in the way of modeling. Where is it furthermore built in? So the matrices, which is the templates.
The reference content.
The what?
The reference content.
Yes, Ginny. It's built into this reference content. It was Ginny, right?
Yes.
Okay. I just need to make sure to remember, when you meet so many people, you see, look at their name tags, it doesn't necessarily mean you remember. So it's built into the reference content. So if I would look over here, I have certain aspects, specifically this would be for the process reference content. I would have here multiple process task descriptions, what I can do with them. It's already defined here which, if this task exists, can it be used by SAP, can it be used by Oracle, can it be used by IBM, can it be used by Microsoft? We already say, now we happen to work with these vendors, parts of them they actually apply due to the fact that they can do this, is the fact that we develop this concept for them or with them together. There are certain tasks that describes how you do it, and then there is others that you literally could look at and say, over here. For those of you who are very interested, this is about services and processes. This is one of the subjects I wish to take during this session. If I have a process model, just normal notations, and there they are shown on the notations, you can literally later on go over there. This is normal notation, so this is the BPM 2.0 notation. How in the world, because we know in my process flows I have information flows. This I can't cover in this session. This is just too short of time. We have Ed Maddock actually following today in the session talking about it. That's specialized. He actually will show different scenarios as well. What do you do by changing it? I only know because I looked at his presentation. So this, in the process, we know we have a service. There is not, or there's few organizations of you who doesn't need to do in one or the other way service renewal or service modeling, or also looking at service flows. Actually, most things in BPM, we then call them handshakes, handovers. You guys are FLS Schmidt, they are a huge mining production organization, or what is it called in English? What you do?
Minerals?
Yeah.
Minerals and cement.
Yeah, in anything in minerals and cements, you have, yeah, in engineering, any of production systems you have seen in mining, minerals, cements, there's most likelihood, very high likelihood, that they have actually built the facilities for them. So they specialized in this. When we looked at the process models, also there, they said, yeah, it's the handoffs and the shakes off when it's difficult. Because this is where the process flow crosses over to a service. That's the task of the one, isn't the output of the one is the input to the other. In services, it's quite easy. Service provider, service consumer. But for process people, we have difficulty seeing that. What do I do if I have to change my entire organizations according to the service flow? That's something I want to take a little bit later on as one of the topics. But the first warning I want to do is, we do not need to learn the meta models or all the relationships. Parts of it is already within our systems. Oh, the internet wants me to log on, that I can work 2 seconds. If not, I won't be able to. Oh, it does work. Good. So, it will be built into the templates, and the others are built into the reference content. There is no need to do it. Good. But I mean, for those, there's few who will be the consulting companies and or the leadings. It might be good to really have understood the way of thinking on it. This is one of the reasons, like we said when Henry did the introduction, and actually our board chairman, Victor Abele, when he talked about how is this set up. Remember the very first presentation he said we will have a way of thinking, a way of working, and a way of modeling. And this is how the conference is set up. some went to the first sessions and said, kind of high level. Well, you remember the thinking of saying we will, way of thinking, way of working, way of modeling. We go more to more in detail. KMX was more, how do I do transformation? It wasn't at the same level like yesterday, parts of these. I mean, just to kind of remember as well, of saying, I'm more like the second day. Well, that's most likely because you're that more modeling person. But if there must be a part that is the way of understanding to it, we do realize some of the subjects, and by the way, we are very sorry, we do realize some of the subjects might then be more interested than to even go to one more detail. We had lots of comments, for example, for Professor Sherons, who said that topic I really would want to have in the way of working or in the way of modeling. I literally need that straight away. We have already thought about to say we will do some sessions around it and make it available for the users. How could they use such a thing in the way of execution? That was specifically for the solution manager. So he described the whole way of thinking around how the relationship came about to solution manager. Obviously, for a person who comes from solution manager or works with it, he says, I was actually expecting that we just demo it. Anyway, different expectations, different works that I understand. We understand this. Having understood that, now how can I read these? You will see them in all of our material. In all of our material. You will actually see it as one of the first. You see it over here in the process reference content. On the top. You will see it over here in the value reference content. It's on the top. So for whatever reasons, there might be a relevance to it. First thing pointed out and described. There might be parts. So how do I read this? This is, by the way, hands-on stuff. That's this session about. So when you say, well, I rather liked your first session much better because that was more an overview. Right now, it's kind of the hands-on parts of the stuff. So it's the nature that we kind of go deeper when you say, oh, couldn't we keep it up there? That's not the purpose of this session. So how do I read this? Somebody wants to try? Not everybody at once. Conference, take it easy. It's after dinner, after lunch. No reasons to be excited here. Everybody starts the wave to be the first. Very good. Ron, do you want to try?
Sure.
But I don't know, how do we give him a microphone? If it's turned on, would it work?
Yeah, let me just.
I can yell.
You can yell?
Yeah.
He works in the DoD. He should be able to yell with a certain command in the voice. But let's try. The audience back there, they will test it.
All right. This shows the maps, the matrix, and the models. And what the maps is mostly a list. The matrix.
Okay, 2 seconds, not so fast. Did everybody hear it? So it shows the maps, the matrix, and the models. What's a map?
The map is basically a list. A list. A list. And the matrix is basically a relationship. And the model is how it all fits together. It's the relationship, how they fit together.
Okay, stay on. I turned mine off that it doesn't give the echo. We saw that problem before. So we have the map, the matrix, and the model. Now let's think about it. A 1 here means a map. A 2 means a matrix. A 3 means a model. Now you might say, let's look at this one. That doesn't make sense. I have an objective in multiple areas. Why would that be? You still want to try it?
Because it relates to those areas.
So I would find duplication. I have an objective in a vision and mission. Well, that should be not a surprise. For those of you who have done vision missions, you would have objectives within them. One might be very high-level visions that might not have them. But most vision missions have some form of objectives within them. What do we even want with that high-level vision and mission? Then I will find them in a strategy map. Yeah, I turned it off.
You can turn it on, I think it will be okay.
I will find it in a strategy map. I will furthermore find it in the aspects of a value map, also a value matrix. So we are saying this is where you would have duplications of objects. Now if you say that view, that's for me too complicated. Let's go back. Every object that has more than one number, that's what we show it. Does this make sense? This will help you to do an integrated modeling. Might I have in my supply chain an area, a measure that relates to multiple processes? Yes. Wouldn't I want to see that that process or that measure is in multiple processes, that I actually don't create duplications of data? Yes, this is where we typically go wrong. This is where we start our organizations do it wrong. And I'm not saying all. Some of you naturally did it good. This is where we actually learn it, where we write a business case. This is how we met Lego, where we said, this is really good, this is what you are doing. There's few that we see that do it in this advanced way. Can we document this? Can we describe it? So I mean, this is where the repeatable pattern came from. It didn't came from, that sounds like a good idea. So in this case, this view is nothing else than what we just saw. So it says, where would this object also be found? Furthermore, let's keep the strategy map. The objective relates to goals. I can see it to the relationships. It also relates to a strategy. It also relates to a vision and mission, and can be related to a driver and a force. Hence, there is a semantic relationship. We say you don't need to worry about the semantic relationship because we already built that into your template. You automatically populate it in the case it's relevant. If it's not relevant, you don't populate it. So it's not complex at all. It is where we try to make things simple that are very complex. If it doesn't relate, don't relate it. It's not like, oh, you know, this Homer Simpson, you know, when he thinks this monkey, ding, 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 ding. It's like, what do I do? I don't have this relationship. That's the good part of the thing. Then don't fill that part out. I don't need to force relationships that don't exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, could you give the microphone up?
Yes, sir. Can you clarify the use of the word in the matrix, duplicate and reuse?
Yes. Is there somebody who wants to try? How does this relate to duplication? How do you make sure that you don't get the duplications, and where could you identify possible duplications? Good question. Could I also use it to possibly identify duplication? And could I use it to not get duplication? I think the last part of the answer we already gave. If I use the maps and matrices, I won't have any duplications because I relate it rightfully. If I, however, How could I also use it? Good question, Dixon, by the way, very nice. Could I use it? It was Dixon, right? Okay. Could I use it to actually identify possible duplication? That's a pretty powerful tool. What would this mean? Let's just ponder a little bit on this. Could you turn your microphone off? I hear an echo. So, this would be quite powerful because it would mean, if this could be, I could start using the templates. One thing to do right modeling, but if I could identify duplications with it, what kind of potential would this give me?
You can consolidate them to the truth.
I could consolidate it to find the single source of truth. Gary, you must love that somebody else says this, right? Now Gary here, he's been preaching this for years. Isn't it true, Gary? Literally trying to get people to understand, guys, this is about a matter of truth. If we have multiple forms of truth,
That's true.
it's even worse. It is not only a question of that I have 3 or 4 times the same cost. I actually have, they are working against each other. I wasn't with your full parts of your session yesterday, but I believe you went into some of that subjects yesterday. So it's all a matter of both, not only that I would have 3, 4, or 500% of the same cost. They actually create the chaos. They are now the source of my problems that create multiple projects that I need for transformation, data integration, etc. Now I'm solving them in a very unsmart way. I have multiple ERP systems. I know they have a duplications of business function, which create duplications of tasks, which create duplications of data. If I have duplications of data, I must have the others too. They have a semantic relationship. So the answer is, yes, Dixon, this is how you can use it, and this is how we have been using it. This is part of what you did, right, Victor?
Yeah, and we're doing again.
Yes, he's doing again. As a matter of fact, but it took some time. We did not know that either. This is about 2009, 2010 when we realized it. So we worked with it close to 10 years until we realized, whoa, I wish you would have been around at that time. I could have told us. We didn't think of that. It was somebody like you in our community who said, you can also do this and identify duplications. Today, this is how we help the organizations transform. You need to do cost cutting, cost savings. We are the fastest source you can identify it in your supply chain, in your business, in your operations, in your warehouse, doesn't matter. Using it, because how do you actually identify duplication? You know you have it. The way to prove it is actually through your data. The problem is the executives don't know nothing about data. They won't understand that duplication of data means that I have duplications of application functions and tasks, which means that I have duplications of processes, which means I have duplications of business functions, which actually means I have either duplications or similar services that I haven't thought about. And I also have now, here comes a huge potential. That means duplications of resources. All of the ones that I just mentioned are huge cost-cutting potentials. Hence, you will find on the parts, on the web page here, you would find aspects where you would have such, what is the duplications? Let's go into this. So, sorry. I would actually have to find where it is. It was not the subject I thought that we would get into, but this is a very valid question, extremely good. It sorts it in a few seconds. So much material on it that it needs to have a short sorting. Here we go. We already know the potential within certain of these main objects. We already know them. We even have a math behind it. You remember Professor Simon talking about that there's a math behind the semantics and the relationships? We already know the potential. We also know how would we want to relate them in order that they actually give this potential. If I have an organizational context, the way of business unit is organized, meaning the purpose and aim of the organizational construct. This means when I optimize this, the purpose and aim, that's what the Unity framework was about. Finding common purposes and goals, objectives. That gives me a cost potential. It doesn't give me more value. Still create the value they do, just at a high cost. In this case, you can actually say if multiple units do the same, they actually they actually do parts of value destruction, but that's another discussion. We say it kind of stays the same. When I harmonize it, it also gives a lot. When I consolidate it or standardize it. Now let's take a look if I have it on my business workflow. This is the way the business unit works, meaning my business workflow. It's a funny thing, both if I unify the purpose as well as the process. Huge cost potential, huge value potential. All of them are huge. It's low-hanging fruits. Now, normally I do not like the word. For those of you who know me, I do not like the word low-hanging fruits. There is two things that trigger me. Actually, three things. One time, keep on repeating the same thing, but that's because I'm an engineer. Marketing knows, keep on repeating it. Repeat the same stuff over and over. That's why I don't really like salespeople. But again, I'm an engineer. I don't like to repeat myself. That's why I personally like better to work with engineers and architects and modelers. The executives, that's why we have someone like Henrik or others. They handle that much better. So there is aspects of this. We know how it fits together. So I don't like repeating myself, and I definitely don't like architects in their meetings when they start. Do you have a description for that? Or they start just discussing the description. I'm sick of endless of discussions of descriptions. They could actually agree 95%, but the only reasons they can't agree is that they discussed the 5% where they can't agree. They don't get started with the things they actually have in common. It's endless frustrating aspects, and architects have the tendency to stop that entire process. Now I do realize parts of our community, as architects, I'm criticizing our own discipline. And the third one is, I don't like to talk about low-hanging fruits. Because architects, also modelers and engineers, you hear on all these organizations, let's pick the low-hanging fruits. Kind of already gets me crippling, because, and Henrik always, when he's with me, he's kind of like, you already know, he kicks me under the table, which actually means, shut up. Don't speak up, because I will say, could you please specify what that low-hanging fruit is? Can we specify how low-hanging it is? Do we need a ladder to pick it? What kind of fruit is it? And is it eatable? By the way, do we even want to eat it? Does it make sense to eat it? I know it's but it's actually to say, they don't know what they're talking about. They just talk about a subject of what low-hanging fruit sounds good, therefore we talk about it. Most organizations that talk about low-hanging fruits, they never get to any fruits.
Makes you sound good.
It's because it sounds good, and the executive, that's the buzzword he knows about. He goes to his executive. We have scoped the low-hanging fruits. Great. Goes to the next executive. We already have captured the low-hanging fruits. Goes to his executive. We have the basket of low-hanging fruits. Anyway, you know how this works. In reality, all we wanted to find out is how we get started. So, I really like this, Dixon. This was not something that I thought that we would capture to this. This took us a couple of years to actually get to there. So in the last 3-4 years, we have a pretty good, the costs of this, how they relate to that, the details of that, how I analyze it. Most of the projects we actually go about doing this. It's not anymore for blueprinting. They use Leap in a totally different way, which led to the whole transformation and innovation concept that is built in. Good. Then we have these ugly big things. Now, it was not because we really felt the need to spend a lot of money on graphical design. Because this happens to have the community that doesn't have any money. Parts of this was paid by myself or Henrik or others because the community has no money. There's no revenue model. In this case, why did we set this up? I mean, there must be a need to do such a monster. What could the need be for that?
Standardization.
We are here, Tony, he says standardization. What could other be? This is true. What else? Yeah?
As an accelerator to doing the model.
Yes, we have captured and put together all the semantics that matter, all the rules that matter, and all the context and concepts that matter to that subject. And not all the details. It's actually, that is the summary. So within it, I would go in the Dropbox and could then find various content. So I'm going to open at the moment the Dropbox folder that we have. So I would go within here. I have various content. And by the way, the Enterprise Innovation and Transformation Enablement, I also want to open up later on and just have a short talk. So we have some of this reference content. We had data yesterday. Let's go to the aspects of, let's take the process. We were talking about process before. I'll take the process later. Let's take the aspects of the value. We already talked about value. So there, I obviously find, as you are seeing, already this poster. Good, fair enough, no problem. I would also find within it, in this case we uploaded the presentations we had here. I would find what is it, how is it put together. Parts of this we actually, what are the objects that are at place? How do I use them? All the same context we go through. Then all the artifacts that matter with their descriptions. Parts of these things you have seen in various different contents. So it would describe it. Now it also relates to context too. Let me describe, for example, this slide. What do I see up here? I see up here, now this is a competency view that links directly. What does this competency view link to? Yes, business models. Very good. So I would know, how does the subject of value, meaning the goals, relate to the aspects of the layers of my competencies and therefore business model. So these are models of understanding for the relationships. I would also know what are my decision-making views that I do at which level. What are my system measurements views that fit to that? Also meaning this must include this. Also it would be, what would be typically process views? An interesting part. We actually typically see organizations, what kind of processes do you think we would find in most process maps? Would it be strategic level processes, tactical level processes, or operational processes? Operational. Did we have some of the Modus 21 guys here because they are locally here as well? We had some of the, yes, we have here. Ron. That was Ron, right? Don, okay, sorry. So Don, what would you more map? Is it operational processes, tactical or strategic? Yes. Well, that's not where they feel the pain. The funny thing is, this is where the pain shows itself. It actually reveals itself in the operations. Because that's where I'm executing it, right? That's the planning phase, that's the direction phase, that's the administration phase of things, controlling and evaluations, etc., etc. Now, would it be important to map processes on other levels?
Yes.
It definitely is. We actually don't know really how to relate it. I'm going to go back to that for the service flows. Because the processes don't naturally relate. My strategic processes are strategic processes. They don't really have a handover. Developing the strategy doesn't really have a handover of operational oversight or execution. So we don't really have the process flows going there. They don't naturally connect. It's where you could not use the discipline of process modeling to get to the solution. Doesn't matter how much you do it. You cannot use this discipline. Is there anybody in this community? Now we have some of the older sharks here, not meaning in age, but in terms of community, who know some of this stuff. What kind of discipline could I use, for example, to map this? And before we answer that, by the way, here there are strategic KPIs, tactical and operational KPIs, that I could use from the process view to do all that levels. We had that example from you, also mentioned saying, well, that's what we did to map, and we said, yes, that's the way you would do it as well. Good. So how would we left to the discussion, what's the link to processes? How do I, in the world, do I get this flow? Anybody? Any suggestions? Yeah?
Well, we mapped, I mean, it comes from the experience we had a couple of years
Maybe
ago.
we should get the microphone, is that possible? Thank you, Don. Very kind.
Well, it's actually on the poster outside. There's a flow model. We find a meta model, service archetypes that flow from the strategic plan, the vision, right down to execution in the tiers.
Good.
Okay.
So what kind of flow would that be?
Well, it's a business flow, it's a service flow.
Yeah, in this case, it's a service flow. You cannot find it in the process flow, because the process flow is a connectivity of input, outputs of activities. I don't have an activity. If I actually develop my strategy, it's activities of developing the strategy. It does not connect to my operational oversight, even though my operational oversight needs to connect to parts of that. If I have evaluations and audits, it does not connect to that strategy. There is no activity connections to it.
Well, there is no logical connection, there's an organic connection.
Yes, there's a service flow connection. So you would have to look at the different discipline. What's the power of looking at it in that way? You actually did this. What's the power of looking at it in such a service flow? I'm opening it up just for the purpose. So I would go here. I'm closing this. Then I'm actually going here to the common reference content. We are going to the service. Yep. There I have the service flow reference content. So obviously, this is where I would look at it. So there is both a matrix to it, in case you want to have the engineering behind it. And there's the one that I actually fill out. So I would fill out, this would be my service owner, it's kind of in which kind of part of the organizations, meaning the competency, would he sit. Then I would actually write down which kind of roles or actors are involved. Now I'm going to the service providers. These have a number. Don't know what this number now means, but there's a reason for the numbering. But let's take the service provider same strategy. We just discussed strategy, right? This was just our example we had. Now a strategy, sorry, let me make this big. A strategy can be consumed by what? Now this is a really, really powerful tool. Just want to explain it, that it can be understood. Because when you understand it, you would be able to use it. Now, what can consume the strategy? The goal. Well, it kind of already says it. It can consume. Another strategy can actually consume this. Also the goal. So we are saying here mostly this is actually consumed by it or worked within it. But we are also saying the service consumers, that this is the direct relationships, but the service consumers with this. Oh, this is an interesting aspect. We are saying another strategy can consume a strategy, which, by the way, a corporate strategy is consumed by multiple business unit strategies. Then a plan can consume the strategy, forecast can consume it, value management can consume it, budgets can actually consume it because they relate to that strategy. Also policies can do, or communication aspects. In this case, all of these are strategic level aspects, these are tactical. This would be then the service consumer number, so I could see here, if in this case, this policy consumes that strategy, let's go down here, let's just keep the policy. That would be number 11. Then we are saying most functions consume the policies. So here I must have now, there's aspects of 2 seconds. There's aspects, now procedures. So guidelines, strategic advice, the plans, the strategy can consume them, but because if a policy is set in place, also actually procedures consume a policy. Or a measurement consumes it. Because a measurement actually lives up to a policy or reports on it. Does this make sense? Now, what you can then see is not only the service flow. What more could you see? Using a little bit of Dixon's thinking here. Normally I wouldn't have brought that in because I would just have used, how can you use it in a modeling? You can also use it in the way Dixon presented back then. Well, how could I use this also? besides defining service pattern. Service flows, very, very powerful. In any organization, we found out this is universal, fittable. I mean, not all of these service patterns will be in your organizations, but how could I also use it? Anyone?
Perhaps the overlaps in ownership.
Both overlaps. I could look for ownerships, saying, oops, I have too many owners of their own little objects, meaning I know there will be a duplication. This is very important. If I have multiple owners on this part of the flow, and parts of it will be, each of them will be kings in their own castles, creating their own data. It's the flow. We are talking about the object of the flow. This is very, very powerful. This is one of them. This is very good. This is also how we use it. Because we are kind of, you immediately show value to the organization. How else? We have two, yes?
Well, almost the amusing part was, and I cited it in, earlier when we were talking about the model, is that you would expect certain things to happen, but you sometimes discover they don't happen. So when you go through a flow, you actually realize that no one is setting a policy. And all of a sudden, because there's no competency center that's setting that policy. Therefore, there is no policy. And the organization talks as if there is a policy, but there is no policy or standard being created.
Yes. As a matter of fact, you can immediately see the gap
You
saying,
can see the gaps.
here should be a policy, but, or a standard, or guideline, but there is no guideline. A little bit, you remember when we talked about your shipping, outbound shipping for all the things, and we said, there must be a rule to it, because if the order was cancelled, it was put to waiting hold, we said up to 6 months to 9 months, we said, isn't there rules that govern this? There are. How come I don't see them on the process? Which means there are rules, but they are not connected, which means this is somewhere up here. I have a service flow problem. You know there's bottlenecks, you know there's pain points on this. It's a must be. It's a must, because you see on the pattern that there is a gap. Boom. It should be here. Now you could then say, this is how we did it. By the way, I think in this way, so it's easy. Most of the organizations say, how in the world do you get that? I mean, if you work with this a couple times, you kind of build it in. It's 29 patterns. We found out these to be universal true. This is one of the most powerful things that I use. I immediately can look at ownerships, gaps, bottlenecks. That's the next one. Let's talk a little bit about bottlenecks. What about the bottlenecks of this? How does this relate to bottlenecks? I mean, we have a lot with Henrik. Remember he talked about this morning, I have a stakeholder, he has an expectation that has a requirement, meaning some kind of problem, therefore a change. If it's a performance expectation, I already know it's about transformation because he's not happy with what's going on. It relates to something. I could immediately look at the flow and saying, I mean, if something is not working good, the likelihood that there is a flow problem, let me tell you, is close to 99%. You can think of very few things that you could come up with that is not a flow problem. Say, no, but data, that's definitely a flow problem. No, but we don't do what we should be doing. That's the problem. That's the function. Or the policy has not been related to it, or the guidelines has not been related to it, or the goals has not been related to it. Well, it's the performance of the monitoring. Yeah, that's definitely is the flow. Because if you would look at the procedures, or the measurements, or the evaluations, if my evaluations and audits are not consumed by performance management, by the way, within 4 weeks, doesn't matter the size of your organization. Doesn't matter the size of your organization. Doesn't matter if you're a government, or if you are Johnson & Johnson or DuPont. Within 4 weeks, I'm telling you, we could tell you your biggest gaps. Your biggest gaps of the reasons for high cost and where it totally goes wrong. Doesn't matter how you can have had thousands of consultants in before where you have to map everything. In governments, I can also, by certain industries, I can already tell you what's most likely that service flow. Now, not 100%. For that, we would have to go through it and we would identify it. But let me mention government without that I can criticize government. But for those who are governments, does government do evaluation and audits? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, all agree?
Mm-hmm.
Do they do policies?
Yes.
Yes.
Too many.
Now, are the policies actually consumed by the procedures? Yes. Because they say they live up to that policy. They actually develop procedures based on the policy. Now, important is they not really always live up to that very spirit. But that's another discussion I don't want to have right now. Now, do I have measurements within the policy? Not always, but sometimes they actually say, and this is how we want to have been measured on it. But in any case, if I do measurements, do I need to relate it to the policy?
Yes.
Yes, this is where the gap comes. I can already tell you this. You have huge potential. You do measurements here, then you do performance management here. Does performance management of the government consume the measurements? No. The measurements are done somewhere else. They report on it. It goes to evaluation and audits. They do it manually, the evaluations and audits. That might go to risk management or procedures or something else. All of this is done manually. The service flow is totally broken. Each of them I handle as separate objects, create data for each of them. It's the same object. As a matter of fact, I've done this for some governments. Some of this in this room have actually been part of such cases. The number of cost saving was so big that they said this cannot be true. Let's rather not look at it. Think about it. Most governments, how long has your reporting, by the way, private sector too, has your way of reporting changed the last 10 years? If you say, yes, we today do scorecards, no. I'm not saying your technology. I'm saying your way of measurement, your way of reporting. That HR sets it, they measure it, they report. Holy smokes. You have exactly the same problem that we laugh about here in governments. Obviously, how can they? It's good that we do better. We haven't thought the flow-through. This is a very powerful tool, and I only wanted to discuss it a little bit on Dixon's idea. Could I also turn it around? Not only to do actually service renewal and service model. So bankings love this. They typically do it for service renewal. Insurance love it. Governments love it. Lots of organizations who have service flows love it. But it also works the other way around to actually identify transformation potentials, innovation potentials, and just cost cutting. If you want to do cost cutting, too sadly, one of the few things that exist today is people. This is the most ineffective way to do cost cutting. I still have the process. I, by the way, still have the systems. I have just eliminated the one factor in the game that I could take care of. Straight away, I took the person. I still actually have an overload for the other people. Sometimes I have to exclude some processes. The best way would actually be to eliminate the duplications.
Which are often in the tactical layers and sometimes the strategic, not in the operational.
Yes, and now here's the funny thing. Our process models have already taken care of the operational. It's between the flows. Very nice that you brought that back to the loop, because actually Victor has worked on this. Literally done lots of savings with that. They are between the flows and we can't find them in our process models. I can already tell you here comes a little bit difficulty. depending on which level got you in. The tactical level got you in, you won't get very far. It doesn't matter how great this approach is, because you're actually coming back with you not doing good. That's not a possible way of doing it. But if a higher level gets you in, or if it's about cost cutting, if you're involved with the CFO on this, you have a winning card. This is one of the best approaches you can use. Anyway, we're just discussing different ways of using it. Hope you see it. It's not the way it must be used. It's a very powerful way of how to use it and work about it. In addition to that, you would obviously have up here, I don't only have the service consumer where I would see the additional parts of the flow. You can do an entire flow on it and look at your process with it. I could also add the information objects involved. Then you actually have your information flow. The reasons is that now I'm not asking for the data objects. Well, data objects are also within the information objects. For those who want not to know the difference, we have on the home page, I think it's a 40-page description of a difference between a business object, information object, and data object. For those of you who are architects and field, I cannot move on unless I have a description for that. It's a pretty good detailed description on it. And that also is pretty unified of how the market sees that. So why would I want to, at this level, identify the information objects? What does this give me? I mean, it makes sense that I look at the competency because it's the competency that has the service. It's okay that I look at the service consumer. I mean, I understand it because I can now connect it to various owners, to various parts of why it is siloed. I mean, all of this is a part of this whole equation that says, I see. I mean, fair enough, we understood most of this. Why would I want to look at this moment of the information object? It's kind of like, poof. I'm talking about competency, I'm talking about service, I'm talking about flow. Whoa, information. What went wrong? It's kind of like, poof. Why do we have it? By the way, there's a very big reasons for it. Obviously, it has something to do with the semantics. All of the things that we have, that we bring in, has something to do with the semantics. But I want to know why. Yes, Chris?
Just like output and input integrate on a process level, execution level here, the information actually bonds, links groups of people who use it. So
yes.
There is a service provider and a service consumer, the people, the department.
You will most likely, your information flow, not only most likely, it will actually be this way, but I want it to be soft. Your information flow doesn't follow the process flow. Your objects follow the process flow. This is right. We do it right in BPMN notations. Because in the process, I use and I create and I store data. It's too sadly that we only talk about data objects, so we don't really talk about data entities and what we do, but that's another discussion. So my data actually does follow my tasks. Because every task either uses the data, creates it, or stores it, or etc. But the information flow is not the data flow. My system flow does not follow my data flow, and should not. My parts of my data flow is embedded in the applications, but are defined by the tasks that I do within that part of that process. So it's for that reason, it has something to do with the information flow. And using this, you can actually define the information flow. Very powerful. So you can also see gaps of information flow, or where it should be, and say, holy smokes. That means that my reporting, my measurement, should go over here, that goes to my evaluation and audits, that actually reports it back to the policy. It's the same object, it should have the same flow. Good. We handle it 5 different systems, hence this is why we have the problem of all that data I want to integrate. I'm going about it wrong. I want to solve it through data. I should solve it through, let's use the same application task, or similar or whatever. Anyway, hope that kind of gave a little bit. Parts of it I know is detailed, other parts of it you say, depending what you work with. We have here people who are really just BPM focused. We have others who already are moving on to the next wave. There's different waves and stages of working with BPM. Also with enterprise architecture. It's actually your maturity. Now again, having said this, we have the templates that populate it. But from experience, and I'm sure, I mean, I'm not 100% sure that it was set. Gary, did you say in your presentation it's important to use a good tool? Good, you did. That's one of his big recommendations too. One of our recommendations is the templates, they help you with the manual modeling, which is always a very long way. You need to have good tools to support parts of this. Parts of this neither you or I can keep in your head, and the template is not only the place to have it. It needs to have tools. My personal recommendation is that whatever tool you choose should be object-oriented. Should be real-life objects. Everything else, and I know there's great BPM, I'm going to call them drawing tools, advanced visual, advanced PowerPoint, just much more fancy and much more expensive. Where you actually just draw, it's not real-time objects. You can't click on it, you can't add attributes, you can't add descriptions, you can't add content to it. It doesn't relate to it, everything else. If they try to sell you a tool and it doesn't have a repository, I mean, my Danish recommendation is beat the guy. But
The Viking.
yes,
The Viking in you.
I see everybody is like, yeah, they are on the wave. It's the leading practice way of doing it. It's like, I'm sorry, I had to. It's like, I'm part of this community. So, but, I mean, obviously it's something different. There's some flow chart as you would want, where you just want to show flows. All you want to have is graphics, pictures. But there's aspects that you need a repository. There's things you need to relate. You must be able to sort the process of saying, show me all responsible, who owns this process. Show me all informed. Show me all my processes where I have this same measurement. Show me all my business objects within this process. Please sort all my processes by a certain data object. I mean, let's face it, isn't that what we want? Yeah. Because if not, all I have is nice pictures, which, yes, that's good for the process person. But for the rest of the organizations, I need something I can work with. If you have an enterprise architecture tool, you must have something where you can do specifications too. This must be real-time things that you can execute, not drawing things. I'm always highly worried about enterprise architecture tools. You can actually relate anything to anything, which the architects do. Spend an immense amount of time doing drawings. It's complex, difficult. You've got to look at this. It's very complex. Yes, I love it. Now, I'm not criticizing my own where I'm from. I'm an engineer who does enterprise architecture. I love it all the way. There is nothing about it. I breathe it and I live it. In this space, I am saying, obviously, it makes sense to have certain aspects of relationships within there. This is why some of these more tools start thinking in aspects of having certain relationships. Some of them can be mentioned as Archimate or sparks, case-wise. I'm not going to discuss how good the meta model is or not. That's not part of these sessions. We're not selling anybody vendors. But the only thing I have to point out, all this, while good, you still need a tool. But I still want to stress the great Dutch saying, a fool with a tool still remains the fool. You can do whatever you want. As a matter of fact, the fool with the tool worries me more than the fool without the tool. Because he's going to be able to do much more damage. So, my goal was to go through a little bit of the things. One of the last things I want to end up with, and go out here. You already saw it. Oh, that was not the part I wanted to open up. Go out here. Here we have it. Remember this slide from Henrik this morning? This is an important aspect. I know you have in the meantime learned, well, they have objects, they have relationships. Yes, 3 relationships matter. Most of models we look at only have 2 relationships. Now we learned this from DODAF. Aspects of DODAF mostly looks at 2 relationships. TOGAF looks at aspects, one here, and here, then your 3 relationships are important. This is where some of them really gets it good. We like it. We love when we come to a customer and they say, we use TOGAF. Perfect. We don't need to train them. We can start with whatever you have. You understand that there's relationships. So you know we use objects. You know we use relationships of these semantics. What we in addition to that have, we have reference contents, we have templates, etc. Then we looked at very detailed accelerators for it, like the service we just showed. Literally where you say, wow, that's way beyond what I would have thought that would be there. There's 2 things I want to show before we have, and we still have 3 minutes. This is the 5 views. Now, Henrik showed the aspects of, you have a piece of paper. I don't want to do too much to this. Got this piece of paper yesterday. This is the NATO architecture, so I don't want to do too much damage to it. So if you bend the piece of paper, there are certain aspects of points that will touch. Okay? Henrik referred to it as wormholes. We don't want to sound too spacey and too difficult. In easy words, it means you can slice and dice it in any ways. You have 5 views that you could immediately see on anything we do at any given time. We have the objects. The objects here are found within our groups. This is a model of understanding. Couldn't get all the 107 objects, and all the 107 objects and the relationships you cannot put in one model that we can view here. It's so big. But the objects I find within here, I can at any time look at an object, the object to which layer it fits, also to therefore to which modeling discipline it fits. I could look at also from the object which requirements exist to that object. There's always a requirement to the object. Always. There's no requirement to the object. You would kind of say, why does it exist? What's the purpose of it? What does it need to do? Well, it's just there. Some of these employees you would find. Who's that guy? We don't know, but he's been sitting here for 3 years. It's a bit strange, but okay. What's your name, George? Why are you here? Is this not a free internet cafe? It's like, okay. Well, they pay me. What do you do? I surf the internet.
So he's out of the business flow, but he's on the pay flow.
Yes. And we all know this exists literally where you said there exists no more line of duty for the persons. But anyway, there is any object has some kind of requirement. A requirement always relates to a stakeholder. Always. Now that could be at various levels. We added it here because I didn't have space here. Stakeholder can. This means that the stakeholder can be at all of the levels. Not only an executive stakeholder. This is very important. Therefore, I can slice and dice it. I mean, the object has a requirement that comes from somewhere. It also must fulfill something. I could also view it from the transformation. That's what Henrik presented this morning. Remember that he says it must fulfill a demand and it must be able to be tracked back to goals and tracked back to stakeholders. I can see the transformation aspects from an object that is within a layer, that has a certain requirement, that fulfills a stakeholder need or want. Doesn't matter how you turn or switch these. There is more views possible, but not at any given point of time. So, this was one of the things I wanted to add. We've already mentioned it. It was one of the things I wanted you to remember when you are using these various different reference contents. In addition to that, when you go on the part of the internet, parts of it you would say, yeah, but I didn't see as many standards in the various areas. Didn't you have 55? Yeah, there's some of them. We are not for the public. We are a community open source. We are not here for everybody. We don't solve everything. As a matter of fact, we have a requirement. If you don't know what we're talking about, you're actually not invited in our community. It's not that we don't want you to be a part, but we definitely don't want you to discuss anything in this context, because you don't really know how to use it. We tried it in the start. It was very, very difficult. Extremely difficult. It crippled our community. We let people in and they would ask the most basic questions and kept on. It crippled our whole organization until we said, and you would very seldom find such a thing, we said you must be certified in one of the areas. Now we are happy to give you access to the rest of the requirement content, even though you only certified in one area. We realize here that a tool and a fool also applies. But I believe you learned how to read it, you learned the principles, and fair enough, you must be able at least to know how to go about it. But again, this is where we then have our consulting partners, which at the moment I realize as well, we have had lots of you, and some of them used it among here, have had much more demand than we could fulfill. Where you said, this is not really cool, we choose an option, and we can't get the help. And it's very normal that organizations love the aspects to get it. Content, no license, no, it's free, there's no it's maintained, it's kept up to date, it's good. They love that. CFO, that's a no-brainer for him. We actually sometimes have the CFO. For Allianz Insurance, we were contacted by them. We're like, how did this come about? Well, it's because we already chose an open source strategy. You were the only one available in all the areas. Oh, okay. But then saying, well, if you want to go about it, you have to do it this way. There is no other way. So you could look at it in terms of requirements. Also enterprise architecture, that's what we are talking about. Or you could view it from multiple aspects of the life cycle. You could also say, what about something like a call center? Or in this case, supply chain and logistics. Let's just click on that for the fun of it. Now it would typically write here some yada yada, blah blah, some more blah blah. This is what we talk about, this is what it does, what is it the standard, how has it been developed, what does it do. Some examples of the artifacts. There's much more. Now you say in some other areas, you might say, I didn't find an artifact. Well, that's because your source of entry will most likely not be the home page. And if your source of entry is the home page, well, then you're not certified, because then you have no access to the Dropbox. That's actually as easy as it gets. If you're not certified and you want to work, contact us if you have an area. We're happy as long as we feel you understand it. It's not that we want to be difficult. We do share. Good example is, Linda and Bonnie here. We have Northern Health actually administer multiple hospitals. But you both came through that aspect that we like it, could we hear? It's like, we do know what we are. Yes, we are, but could we? And that's fair enough, no problem. Let's face it, most organizations are. Cost is an issue, training is an issue, and then you guys have already set it up, so that's not the point. But until it gets there, that journey, it's no problem. We're happy to share. We share the hospital business models, various measurements, various lots of other stuff. In that case, as long as we feel it can be digested. As a matter of fact, we had multiple calls. In this case, we're limited to, well, the freeconsulting.com is not always easy. But that's not how the community, but we want to help. It's important for me to say that there is, and we want to give help. So I could be looking at it, I could be clicking on this, and that could be, this is our competency maps. This would be in demand and supply chain. Now, how did we develop these? These were developed based on, well, multiple organizations who did supply chain. We realized they have kind of the same competencies. They have demand and planning and forecast. This is some of the things they did. We are not saying you have to do it. It's kind of reference content. You could then look at it. What do you do in procurement? You say, oh, that's kind of high level. Yeah, that's what competency maps are. You could say, oh, that fits very good to my process models. Yes, this is used for a business model. The rest that comes from here on are used from here, and they are business functions that is in the operating model, and everything from there are process models. Could also be that you say, this would be, some of the things are shared online. This is one of the business models where you could look. I don't think this is very sharp for you, the granularity, but fair enough. You can download it yourself or click on it or use it. Where it would be, where you would have actually the whole value-added services, production management. So this is a logistics service provider in this case. There's also lots of other supply chain business models. These are examples. Could also be the entire business model assessment. Then we actually use, you can benchmark yourself. Are you core competitive or core differentiating in that competency? You can actually do an as-is ranking from 1 to 10. Do I have current measurements? A 2B ranking. This parts of this is very, very powerful to see. Let me make an example. You have multiple supply chain, multiple providers. They have different capabilities. This is the fastest way to see what is common, what could be shared. How do you work together? It could also be a strategy map. What are the most typical strategies chosen in the supply chain? So if you have a supply chain cost efficiency, this is what we saw typically happens. That's an example of it. There's much more. Kind of like, what do you put on the home page? Parts of the parts, that kind of gives the idea. Could also be such a value map, where you actually have the link between the value drivers and the performance drivers. Where you actually say, oh, we have improved the supply chain services. Well, what have all the other organizations we met, did they do to improve the supply chain services? Kind of say it's a funny thing. I do realize, and the reasons I show you this is beyond modeling disciplines of BPM or value management. This is where the organizations, this is actually an aspect that fits to value management, the other fit to business modeling. So they actually captured accelerators and put them together. This is a really, really, really powerful aspect of the community. Many of them, I mean, this is parts of the internet. Many of them would be within a Dropbox, or some of the accelerators that we find to be quite advanced. We do not have in a Dropbox. You would have to use the partner we have. Why? Because we said some of them, I don't believe, or we don't believe you can do. If you're up to it, we're always happy to share. But some of them we say, well, for that reasons we have partners. Now, we don't make money for them when they do consulting. But it's the aspects of where we say there's a purpose that they exist and they will help you. This will really create value. I'm coming to the end of my presentation, where you could even go to aspects here of, here you would have typical scorecards and the performance measurements that you would have within them, etc., etc. In aspects where we said, so this, by the way, all of this that I just showed, I would dare to say we nearly have it by every industry. In the meantime, we have 120 sub-industries where we have it, including hospitals, healthcare, mining, postal, railways, the collection of defense, supply chains, warehousing. It's a funny thing that such a community, the first parts we get it in, then we get others saying, oh, we had the same. So it's kind of like when we start to see a repeatable pattern of 15, 20, 25, we say, okay, now it can be done. And it must be cross-industry applicable if it's cross-industry, like supply chain. Anyway, you get the idea, I think. All right, this is it for today. The good thing is Henrik showed up. He knows by experience